Before here, going to be looking at a couple of things in the next few days about different parts of the meta and essentially looking at different pillars separately. We're going to start with part one, and that is aggression. So here we go. We're going to look into each. We're going to look at kind of the power of aggressive play. We're going to look at its spot in the different pillars of Star Wars Unlimited. We'll look at understanding the aggressive mindset, some aggressive leaders and their strategies, mastering the trade, how we are able to use units and trade into others, and our position within the meta. We'll get a couple example decks, and let's go ahead and roll right along. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Really helps us out with growth, and I really would appreciate it. We've talked before on this channel about the different pillars of Star Wars Unlimited. This game is very much a game of paper, rock, scissors. Aggression is strong into control. Aggression is weak into mid-range. Mid-range is strong into aggression, but weak into control, and control is strong into mid-range, but weak into aggression. Here we are looking at the very first of those. We're looking at aggressive play. One of the things about taking a control deck to a major tournament. Major tournaments are best of 3, and so taking a control deck gives the potential risk of not finishing games, just due to the fact that they are much longer in nature, between a game cycle and a sideboard and things that are there. Hitting that 55-minute time limit can be very possible with a control deck, and so they are kind of the lesser present of the 3. Meaning that your aggressive decks have to either be more aggressive than the ones that are around them, or they have to be a little bit better into mid-range than they are into their natural strength. That said, aggression in Star Wars Unlimited has a long history of some pretty heavy play and a very good history of conversion, where we look at the set 1 and set 2 meta. Boba was the big thing that beat most everything out there. In set 2, he was 41% of the top 8. He's now suspended. Sabine was second at 14.5. Han was the winner of that Boba Fett suspension, especially Han Yellow, and saw a 22% meta share. His biggest tool, DJ, has since been suspended. Sabine, again, second. Still the same kind of percentage, 14.8. We have now seen a Jango Fett suspension already in set 4, and granted, we have a sample size of 1 with our large tournaments, but Sabine is at 12.5%, 1 out of 8 in that top 8. Yeah, it's a sample size of 1. A couple other leaders are at 25% when you see Quinlan and Han, but those two were kind of expected. We'll see how that shakes out as we get into the PQ season that is coming up after this weekend. The mindset of an aggressive deck is to get in, get damage done, do it as quickly as possible, and be done with the game very early, before other decks have a chance to really get off the ground. We want to maximize our threat with minimal resources, and we want to gain or retain initiative in most cases so that we can be on the front foot and attacking rather than reacting to what our opponent's deck is doing. That said, aggressive decks typically have some of the smaller cost units in the game, and they use those units to try and create high threat. I've shown you Battlefield Marine here because Battlefield Marine is kind of the highest end of what we see in a 2-cost unit. It has 6 stat points. It's got 3 attack. It's got 3 health. It is as big as we get when we talk about something that is going to cost us just 2. 5 stat points is the maximum for a 1-cost unit. I mean, in theory, Rey can make a 7, but she uses 2 resources to do that. 5 stat points all have bounties except for R2-D2, and the highest attack that you get on them is a 3, and those are usually the stormtroopers that only have 1 health. When we look at a 3-resource play, the key stat line there is a 3-5, and usually that's a 3-5 split as kind of our biggest health unit, the hardest thing for a 2-cost to take out, and is able to cleanly take out most of your other 2-cost units. Now, the reason that we're an aggressive deck, I'm okay with your 3 resource play taking out my 2. I'm okay with that. The reason I'm okay with it is that I played my 2, I attacked with my 2, you played your 3, it was exhausted. If I got initiative, I got to attack with my 2 again before you managed to finally attack and clear it. I am okay with that trade every single time, especially if I have had an opportunity with something like this Battlefield Marine to play a Fleet Lieutenant, or even better, to play something like a Wing Leader that gives it a durable buff and makes it harder for your 3 cost 3/5 to remove it. 10 points is the maximum that we see at a 4 cost. We start to see bigger things and board impact when we move up to 5, but only 5 attack in that. And so why I say that we're gearing towards some smaller cost units is that 2 actions for 6 attack typically works better for a aggressive deck than a single action will for 5 attack the next turn. And so that's kind of the mindset behind that aggressive play, and it's going to be the overarching theme of what we talk about with the rest of this set. We have to understand where we are. We have to understand what pillar my opponent is playing. Is that a mid-range deck that I'm sitting across from? Is that an aggressive deck that I'm sitting across from? Or is it control? If it's aggressive, I need to know if that deck is more aggressive than I am. There are some things that we'll look at that are they are the aggressive deck in an aggression versus aggression mirror. There are some things that we'll look at that are going to fall into the mid-range and control part of a aggression mirror. With mid-range, it is about outrunning their mid-game. Their mid-game and their end-game is typically stronger than what you have, and they like to do tempo plays in a lot of cases that will keep you falling behind and kind of slogging through with those aggressive decks to the point where they kind of grind you down. And then with control, I want to be able to outrun their end game. I am never going to, in an aggressive deck, be able to overwhelm the end game of a control deck. It's just not what these things are meant to do. And avoiding the late game is all about understanding when I can put down more units. One of the things that I talked about in a Bossk Blue, in a playing against Bossk Blue and playing against other things that are hard control, is to say, what is the earliest point where I can create board advantage, where I can get more things down than they can kill at once? And from that point, how quickly can I be off to the races? Base selection is a thing that we want to think about when we are talking about our aggressive decks. ECL and Tarkentown are our 2 primary candidates as far as rare bases go, versus the 30 health bases, because our options in yellow and blue are not as favorable when it comes to what we're doing with our aggressive decks. ECL gains ambush for us at the cost of that 5 base health. Tarkentown gains us the ability to remove something at the cost of that 5 base health. But in a lot of cases, we're going to see, and because we've seen this data out of Sabine, reducing the actions with ECL often creates more of an advantage than Tarkentown, because Tarkentown costs us an action, which often will cost us initiative. A thing to think about: how many actions does it take for me to win versus my opponent? There's a good video a couple weeks ago where KTOD was talking about putting an opponent in check. And that's a really great way to think about it, because we want to know if we're down to a couple of actions apiece and away from our base being depleted, is there a way that my actions can force their hand into certain things for me to keep them from being able to act against my base? Similarly, how many actions does it take for me to break through and to get that reach card and to get to a spot where I am able to take somebody out cleanly and keep them from putting me in check? So it's a great way to kind of think about things, and it's a good thing to know. When we're looking at Quinlan, one of the things that we'll talk about with that in the next set of this is that most of his things attack for 3. And so when Quinlan is sitting down across from a 30 health base, He is thinking that he is 10 actions into base away from winning that game. If I'm sitting down as an aggressive deck against Quinlan, I know that he is 10 actions against base away from a 30 health. He is 3 less actions. He's going to have to swing at my base a 9th time to get by 25 health. And so you're still pretty close to that same 10. And yeah, he's going to be able to do some pump cards. He's going to be able, if he keeps units on the board, to do things like swing for 6 with Plo Koon, which uses 2 of those at once. But my ability to get under that is what I want to think about when I am playing into that matchup. Let's talk about some of the leaders. Sabine is really kind of the gold standard for this. She is very well known. She's very well positioned. She's been stable since set 1. Most commonly, you're going to see Sabine run with ECL. Her leader action is to ping a damage to each base. Her on-attack ability is also going to push damage towards a base, even if you are not attacking base directly. And that also works, if you happen to be playing Twin Suns, it's 1 to each enemy base. The biggest units that Sabine is going to have in her deck are likely going to be Poe and Wrecker. You're capping out at 6 resources. You might go back to a 6th resource after you have used Wrecker, but this is about your cap for when you're resourcing. Don't be surprised if they've stopped there. If they go a turn without playing Wrecker, it's probably because they didn't have him in their hand, because they're going to use that thing just about every time that they have 6 resources and the ability to do so. The newest addition that we have here is Sabine's Masterpiece, which is a great tool to have, especially if you have some green units and some red units on the board, because that gives you the option of putting an experience token on something and doing a damage to a unit or a base. Pulling this out with Timely Intervention is great. Pulling it out with ECL is great, because it allows you this is a way to take down the Falcon through ECL if you have a green unit on the board already, which, as we showed, her preferred turn 1 play is going to be able to put down a Battlefield Marine. As far as initiative goes, Sabine is going to prefer to act first in most cases. She is not typically going to ping with her leader ability if it would cost her initiative, if it would cost her the ability to swing first next round. Otherwise, if you're playing Sabine and your opponent has claimed initiative, most likely you're going to want to ping and shorten that clock, unless you're in a race that you think you're going to lose otherwise. But your first action or your first thought should be to have initiative. If you have a situation where initiative is not something that you're going to get, that's where you consider how you want to shorten the clock with her leader action. Kazuda. Kazuda has not finished above 63rd in one of our sector qualifiers, but that does mean that they've given out a showcase for him. New leader to Jump to Lightspeed, new action to Jump to Lightspeed, with the ability to wipe the negative impact off of a unit and then follow up with the next action. Common resource cap for him again is at 6. The Han Solo unit the pilot unit that I did not show in this, is likely to be the top end of his deck, though he may play all the way up to 7. If he does, then you're expecting that Han Solo, the Spark of Rebellion unit, or Infus Nest are going to be the top end units that he plays. I play this in yellow. I think that's probably the best combination, but I could be very, very wrong. Either way, I like the utility of Cunning in that deck and playing it for its cost. And so I think that that's a great way to be able to play this. The biggest tools in this deck are Falcon Piece of Junk and the Stolen AT Hauler. That Stolen AT Hauler is the largest unit at 3 cost by a pretty substantial margin. And being a space unit, it is much larger than other space units that are around. And then, of course, as we said, Cunning as a double yellow is a very likely tool to see. Initiative. Kazuda has the ability to kind of steal initiative by wiping one of his units that he's played and then immediately grabbing initiative as the next action. And this is often going to swing things in his favor at the beginning of the game. he's a pilot, and so he can action condense if he is on a ship. And being a pilot for Kazuda is probably his best place to be, because that also means that he is swinging for 3 instead of swinging for 2. Sabine effectively swings for 3 when we talk about base, because she pings the base with her ability, even if she attacks into a unit. Kazuda does not, and so him being aboard a ship as the pilot is the way that he gets that 3 damage in. Leia. Leia has had a harder time breaking through, largely because she does not have access to ECL. Unless you play double command, and there's just not as much support with double command as there has been with some other things. No clear-cut space presently. She does have a very powerful synergy when it comes to Rebels. We're going to have to see where Rebels go in the next couple of sets to see if Leia does get any help before her group rotates off, but that kind of remains to be seen. Her leader action is an action cheat with that Rebel synergy. If you're able to have 2 Rebel units on the board, you use Leia's action, you attack with both of them, and then you generally can grab initiative later on down the road because you have swung twice with a single action. Common resource cap, kind of undefined. She deploys on 5 as opposed to the other 2 who deployed on 4. So she's a little bit later, but she's a bigger body at 3/6 and has raid with her. So she swings a lot bigger as well. The biggest threat with Leia is going to be something like a Fleet Lieutenant off of Timely Intervention, which, especially if Leia is up, will allow you to swing with Leia, swing into something with the Fleet Lieutenant, that had ambush, then swing with Leia, then swing with something else, or to Rebel Assault and choose Leia as the second thing that swings, because that will allow you to take 3 attacks at once and get a bonus on the first pair of them. Leia has a second to none ability to action condense, especially if units are on the board. She is very unlikely to be looking to trade into units, unless she has to take out a Sentinel. But that ability to swing twice and then finish up her actions before the opponent has the opportunity to, really makes her hard to take the initiative from. But that's kind of where she sits with that. We will not see a deck with Leia in this video. And then we have Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren has made a showing in a couple of these tournaments. He has an absolute glass cannon. And what I mean by that is that it is 100% one of the fastest decks that's out there, but it is either going to be done immediately when it wants to be and mow through opposition, or it's going to lose. And there's really no in between. You're not going to grind out a game with Kylo to a turn 9. It's just not going to happen. Leader action here is to discard cards and buff units on attack. So if you don't get MiGs on the field and, Quinlan is trying to throw away your cards, you don't really care that much. You wanted a hand that was empty anyway. But combined with MiGs Mayfield, he is able to deal damage to units and buff his own. And even throw that down in turn 1. Put MiGs on the board. They put down a unit. You discard a card to deal 2 damage. Doesn't matter that you didn't really get the buff, and then Tarkin Town and get rid of the opponent's unit. Very commonly played with aggression, as that double aspect allows you to use aggression at cost. You're not going past like 4 or 5, so it doesn't really matter. You don't want to play aggression for 6 in this deck. It's just not a good place to be. The threats, because of what it can do, aggression is very threatening in this deck. It's not only able to rip away some of the upgrades that are now more common, but it allows several of his units that are that are 3 or less attack to be able to ready and potentially swing a second time, as well as the damage that gets across with aggression. We mentioned MiGs already. he's a staple in this deck. Fallen Lightsaber is a big threat, especially if it can go onto Kylo Ren, because if that empties his hand, you're talking about a leader that all of a sudden became an 8/7, and that is a very, very powerful entity to deal with on the 4-resource turn. And then Mr. Bones makes an appearance here because as a double aspect card, yeah, he's a 1 cost for 3, but if you cannot clear him in some way other than attack into him, he's going to be able to deal his 3 and deal 3 damage to something on a fairly frequent basis. Initiative is a problem for Kylo because his leader ability requires an action, and his use of Tarkin Town also requires an action. And so it is not uncommon for Kylo to use 3 actions on turn 1, which is just a slow process. And so, very common to see him do things and do things and do things and churn actions early, and continue to do that until his flip turn, where he is kind of playing from behind. Let's look at some decks. In a second. Mastering the Trade. Mastering the Trade here is all about calculated risk. There are times where I will want to trade into units, which generally involves defeating 1 unit at the cost of 1. Forced trades in this game are very rare. There actually are very few things in this game that have the Sentinel keyword so far. And so forcing your opponents into a situation where they must attack a unit is a little bit more rare. And so most of the time it is our option whether we are going to attack a unit or attack the base. We're racing. We want to attack bases almost as much as possible unless there is a compelling reason otherwise. And I'm going to talk about the example that's down here in the corner in just a second. Your goal is to deplete your opponent's base as rapidly as possible. Your trades should reflect strategic removal. What do I mean? Well, most efficient trades are 2-for-1s. Here we have an example of Sabine Wren, Explosives Artist, the unit card from Spark of Rebellion, and a Crafty Smuggler. Crafty Smuggler comes in shielded, and Sabine is one of the few units who can take this out without having to bounce a second attack off of it, because she has the on-attack ability to deal 1 damage to the defender or the base. So Sabine, in a deck where she is faced against Gar Saxon, for example, won't want to just go back and forth and trade her 3 damage into base for the Crafty Smuggler's 3 damage into base, because eventually Gar Saxon playing on a 30 is going to win that race. You're going to have to take care of the shield for that Crafty Smuggler to be dealing with a 2, but I can swing Sabine into it, and in doing so, ping its shield, remove the unit, and have a Sabine that survives. So they will have to attack back into it and deal 1 damage to Sabine in order to get rid of her. And during that time, if I gain the initiative, I can use Sabine and swing 3 to base. So, other things to consider that make those trades more efficient are things like Overwhelm. A very common card, if you are playing Heroism, is to play Wrecker and to break through with Overwhelm, or to do something where you have Ambush and in a single action be able to remove a unit, hopefully leaving yours behind. That is just kind of the key staple of aggressive decks. Now let's look at some decks. This is the Richmond winner. This is William O'Neill's deck that he piloted to a win at the sector in Richmond. I thought this was very well played. I got to see this on live stream a couple of different times and to see it win a couple of different ways. In the finals, there was a lot of main deck upgrade hate, and with an open deck list, you understand that coming in, and so instead of Luke Skywalker and the Darksaber and Chewbacca being deployed as upgrades, you kind of steer away from that and you steer into more of your surrounding deck. A couple of things that you just want to note here. There is a strong presence of Rebel here, and that really runs through a lot of what's there when we talk about Rebel Assault. The things that are not Rebels in here would be the Sundari Peacekeeper. Poe is not a Rebel, and Wrecker is not a Rebel. Just about everything else is eligible to catch off of Rebel Assault and Metal Ceremony. Timely Intervention was used with just fantastic effect in this deck. And that was a great part of the finals. I would encourage you to find that stream if you have not and watch William play this deck, because it is a great masterclass in seeing Sabine played out. The thing to note here is that For a Cause will not always hit. Just because you have 4 cards that are in here, you have 8% of your deck that are non-heroism. And so, if you know that you have put down a couple of timely interventions, or if Darksaber is in your hand, you have a much higher chance of For a Cause I believe in going for 4. Otherwise, keep in your mind that a 22 is where you need to be instead of a 21 to be able to play For a Cause I believe in to finish off a 25 base. Or if you're doing that, the same math applies for 30 or otherwise. Some very strong plays in here. Sabine's Masterpiece, we already talked about a little bit. Getting a green unit anywhere on the board, or especially getting a green and a red unit. But green units especially are very helpful, because green units allow you to do things like to take out the Falcon and survive. If Luke Skywalker or the Battlefield Marine is down and your opponent plays a Falcon, you can ECL into it with Sabine's Masterpiece, gain an experience with the on attack. That will become a 4/4. You will take out the Falcon's 4 health, and you will survive its 3. Cassian is a very well-known play in here, and putting him down with Smuggle, bringing him out for a bit of reach with 5 resources later, and being able to bring him up and ready is very strong. If your opponent does not answer space and does not have a whole lot of upgrade hate, Chewbacca and or Luke can just single-handedly win games if they're plopped on one of the 2 ships early. Sundari Peacekeeper was a part of a very interesting puzzle that was on one of the Facebook groups a couple of days ago, where you had a Sabine that was in check and needed to do a certain thing in order to extend the game. But Sundari Peacekeeper and the Restore, the Raid 2 Restore 2, is a really, really powerful synergy that is there, or not really synergizing with a whole lot, but there's a really, really powerful effect that is there, because he is able to. He's also synergy with the Darksaber. And so if he's able to get there and stick for a little while, which is very easy to do with 5 health, the next turn, if Sabine gets Darksabered, that becomes a real problem with the Peacekeeper. And so, a play line of Explosives Artist into Sundari Peacekeeper, Sabine Flip into Darksaber is just a nasty, nasty combo to deal with. Your sideboard over here has a little bit of upgrade removal. It has some concession for space when we talk about being able to put out a Sentinel. Has an extra Sundari Peacekeeper, and then Fighters for Freedom, which not only gives you a little bit of a Saboteur presence, but a little bit of reach, because if you are removing some things like removing the Darksaber, or taking out something else that's green in here, then you're able to more cleanly guarantee that your deck is going to be red and start pinging your opponents for damage as you're playing cards. Kazuda Double Yellow. I told you this is the version of this deck that I prefer. I stop usually at 5, maybe 6 resources. This particular deck stops at 5 because we have Plo Koon and Han Solo as our top end. Some really interesting effects that are here. We have the ability to ambush in with our turn 1 play. We also have the ability to play Leia as our turn 1 and ready a resource, and then come back and play either any of these 8 cards, the Cartel Turncoat, R2-D2, or Republic Y-Wing. Those are also there with the idea that on 6 resources we can enable Plo Koon if we need to be able to bring him up and get an extra unit on the board. That is a thing about the pilot decks. When Kazuda goes in, when when Kazuda goes in as a pilot, that does not add a unit to the board. That just adds an upgrade to a ship, as opposed to when Quinlan flips as a leader, as a unit, that adds a unit to the board and enables the coordinate from Plo Koon more cleanly. A couple of things that are in here. We have several ways between Lux Bonteri to be able to ready or exhaust units based on need if something comes in discounted. That is one example of some upgrade hate that's here. Other things that are there, you have Waylay, you have Cunning that can help out with things that are upgraded. You have Jam Communications in here to get rid of some interrupts, not interrupts in this game, to get rid of some events. Surprise Strike here to push damage. You have several instances of cards that are here that have either bounties or that have negative effects. Fireball damages itself. Contracted Hunter defeats itself at the end of a turn. Millennium Falcon can have its resource turned off. And then the Stolen AT Hauler can also have its when defeated effect turned off by Kazuda's leader ability. The sideboard of this looks very similar to some of the things that you would see in a Quinlan deck, and focuses a little bit on discard that we don't get to do really without Force Throw, but it also exhausts some units or makes things a little bit harder to play, and that plays into Kazuda trying to use something like Cunning, shutting down an opponent's board, boosting his own attack, and punching through. And then finally, we have a 21st place in the Richmond sector qualifier. This is the highest that a Kylo deck has finished so far. And as we said, this is very, very much a glass cannon. The highest that's in here is a 6 between the Ruthless Raider and the Wild Rancor. When I have play tested this deck against other aggression decks, I have never played a 6-cost card. It's all about the race and getting there as quickly as possible. A couple little pieces that are in here. You notice that there is a lot of 1-cost units. Right here, there's 10 units that are 1 cost. We are meant to empty our hand. Although one of our preferred plays is Miggs Mayfeld, we do have a nice selection of 2-cost units between Kylo's Tie and Bo-Katan Kryze. Kylo's Tie, meant for use in Kylo to be able to discard that card and then play it, but that works best if we have popped down a couple of these little 1-drops early on. Armed and Dangerous, great thing to be able to put on, especially if we're talking about putting that on and then squeezing to Von Rigg's Tie, because that activates some of its abilities as well. Because we have a Force unit as our leader, we also put in Fifth Brother, and we have more targets for the Jedi for the Fallen Lightsaber. Pillage is in here to clear a little bit of hand, and then we capped out with some Overwhelm and a Ruthless Raider. If you look at the sideboard, you'll notice that there really isn't a whole lot here to pivot. You are a glass cannon deck. You are staying a glass cannon deck. You might try to block somebody from healing if they're doing so with Wolf. You might strip out a couple of key upgrades if you're needing to. But everything here in the sideboard is about more aggression, if that's possible, and making this something that is able to play in even a little bit faster if necessary. And so know that this is this is going to win its game, and it's going to win it right now, or it's not going to win at all. So this is kind of some of the basics for aggression and where some of the better decks are as far as the fastest ones that you're going to be able to play right now in this portion of Jump to Lightspeed. I do think that aggression, because of the way that things are slated, is in a good spot. You no longer have to tech for a very powerful mid-range deck, which was Django. And as we saw with the just basic meta analysis of Richmond, Sabine picked up 10 percentage points on Quinlan, which was one of her stronger pieces of the meta with a bad matchup. Now, we'll see once we get more data points. Those were the two most common decks, which a Sabine was 10% of the field and Quinlan was 9% of the field. We'll see when we get the tournament this weekend if that continues to be the case. And we should have a lot more data to see if that is a spike based on player ability and just kind of randomness, or if that is enough data to tell us that, Sabine is actually somewhat favored into that matchup. Anyway, that is our look at aggressive decks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you have not, and we will see you next time.